It is a big day on the Texas border. The vice president is coming. 2 Texas House committees are tackling the crisis, and ICE raids are expected to ramp up this weekend. Coming up next on Decibel Dialogue, we'll talk to some Austin folks who are on the front lines to help in this crisis. Good afternoon, everybody. Happy Friday, and welcome to Decibel Dialogue. I'm Judy Maggio, and we can't deny there is a humanitarian crisis no matter what your political stripes. We all know about some of the suffering that's happened down on the Texas border. But what you may not know is there are a lot of unsung heroes. Volunteers are stepping in to help asylum seekers with hot meals, medical supplies, hygiene items, and also legal experts who are down there helping as well. So we've invited 3 of the folks in Austin who have been on those front lines helping to kind of give us perspective on the realities of what is happening on our border right now. First of all, the vice president is traveling there today. At the same day, Houston, some House Democrats are talking about this in a hearing. And I want to begin by introducing you all too. This is Alba. She is volunteering with Catholic Charities, is that right?
Actually with Angry Tías y Abuelas.
Okay, okay, Alba Sereno. Then we have Finch, who has been working with Brownsville, Team Brownsville.
Yes.
And we have Justin Estep, who is with Catholic Charities of Central Texas and Director of Immigration Legal Services. So thank you all for being here. My first question is that the Vice President is coming down today to take a look. At the same time, House Democrats are also observing and sharing what they saw when they went down. What do you think the Vice President will see when he attends the McAllen situation? Anybody want to take that one on?
I can't imagine that he's actually going to cross the border and try to interact with any of the people who are stranded before you get to the bridge. So I think that many of these photo ops that the government officials take on are exactly that. He may stop by Catholic Charities, Humanitarian Respite Center, but in actuality of actually seeing or talking or interacting with any of the people, I just don't think that's what they're down there for.
I want to ask each of you why you do this work, because it's got to be frustrating and it's got to be grueling. What inspires you to do this type of work?
In my case, I myself am an immigrant, and I should say, immigrants are made in this part of the world by artificial borders, bottom line. My family is a transnational family of 5 generations of people in this northern Mexico and then what became the United States, Texas region. And it is very clear to me, having been a person who in my generation came, quote, back to the United States in that 5 generations of migration to our land and through our land, and having grown up on the U.S.-Mexico border, that this is a very manufactured crisis. There's no doubt that in Central America there is a lot of suffering going on, but what is less often talked about by our current government is that they have a big part, and our country here in the United States has a big part of the making of that crisis for many decades. And many companies and our U.S. government have a part of the making of that crisis that is driving people out of their homelands in Central America. So for me, they are undeniable truths. It is personal experience that drives me to do that. And having served as the previous vice chair of the Immigrant Affairs Commission for the City of Austin, there's just no question that we have to step up when we're called to by current events.
And you're at the age where you're supposed to be just sitting around and enjoying life, but you have chosen to go down to Brownsville, every 3 weeks or so?
Just about, yes.
Why do you do it?
It started with the separation of the families. I have grandchildren, And the mere thought of someone separating my grandchildren from each other or from their parents was just more than I could imagine. Being a fairly visual person, I had to go see. So I got in my little car and I tootled down to Brownsville. And what I found was just startling. And it kind of steals your heart and it energizes you. The energy and the love and the commitment and the devotion that the volunteers who live in Brownsville and are on the ground is totally overwhelming. And so if I can, in any small way, relieve them for a day or two, create a system where they can receive more help, anything that I can do to help them help others is just the very least I can do. As I cross the border and interact with the people who are seeking asylum, I see, I'll be in tears, but I see my grandson in many of their faces. And it's just by grace that my grandchildren were born on this side of the border and not that other side. And if they were in this situation, I would certainly want lots of people to step up and speak for them.
Thank you. Justin, you're an attorney.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that there are other ways you could make a living than doing legal work for Catholic Charities. What inspired you to get involved in this front?
Sure. So, I mean, first of all, I've always had an interest in immigrant affairs and issues. Growing up in Houston, it's one of the most diverse cities in the country. I grew up with a very eclectic group of friends and people. And so I ended up, once I graduated from law school, getting into immigration law, but first at a firm, doing mostly employment-based. And then I started doing pro bono work, which was one of the reasons I became an attorney. And I did a U visa, actually a Catholic Charities referral case. And that is for victims of crime who are undocumented. If they report it and they can get that certified, they can be put on a pathway to permanent residency and citizenship. And it took about a year, but got that. And then DACA came out, started volunteering with DACA, and I realized after about 4 years at the firm that what I was doing for my pro bono work is really my passion. I didn't mind what I was doing for my day job, but I really was passionate about that. And luckily, about the time I started looking, the director, former director, who gave me my first case left, and I was able to come over to Catholic Charities, and it's been amazing ever since. And then, of course, especially over the last couple of years, trying to put as much effort as I can into it because like everyone's been saying, there's a need and there's almost a mandate, I feel, for folks in our position to provide those services when we can, or the resources for others who can provide the services. And so, yeah, that's why I went down to the border twice last year. We can do a lot here in Austin, but the crisis is even more acute there at the border, so anytime we can get down there, we try to go and help.
I'd like for each of you to share kind of an anecdote or a story that you think would resonate with people. And I'm going to ask you, Anne, to do a specific one because I know we have some photos of it. And this is the story of an unaccompanied minor on the bridge, correct?
Yes.
Tell us about that story.
Actually, they're not on the bridge. When we first started in 2018, they were allowed to sleep on the bridge. But now we're in a plaza. So think about concrete and asphalt. And on any given day, we can have between 50 and 192 people who are living in that plaza, staying in that plaza, seeking asylum. We currently have about 1,900 names on the list of people who are trying to present themselves in Brownsville for asylum. But we have a core of people. The rule is if they call your number and you're not at that plaza, you don't get to go. Mm-hmm. Your name drops off the list and you start over. So we have this congregation of people. And my friend Michael Benavides, who is one of the co-founders of Team Brownsville, goes across that border twice a day. He goes in the morning and takes breakfast, and he goes again at night, and he gets to know these people on a personal level. I go down for 3 or 4 days, and I'll get to kind of know somebody, but I certainly don't know them the way he does. And so we were down serving dinner one night, and he came over and said, "Are you ready?" And it's like, ready for what? What are we doing now? And he had met this girl. She was 17 and a half years old. Her name is Jessica. And Jessica was unaccompanied. She was on this bridge with up to 190 people. 80% of them are young men between the ages of maybe 19 and 35. That was not a place for Jessica to be. So he had interviewed Jessica and talked to her. She had had all of her papers stolen. So if she had gotten called to the border, she would never have been allowed in. So he contacted her family. We all use WhatsApp on our phones, and we let these people use our phones. So he contacted her family in Honduras, and they got together her birth certificate and the legal documents about why she was fleeing the country, emailed them to him. He printed them out, took them down there, and unbeknownst to me, we took her and walked her across that border. If I had known the legal ramifications of doing that, I might not have been so willing. But it was such an honor to be involved in that. And I made Michael explain to her 3 times what was going to happen to her. That when we presented her, she would be taken away. She would probably be strip searched. Everything she owned would be taken. She would be put into an ice box. And she would be held for a couple of days, and then she would be transferred to an unaccompanied minor facility where she would spend 6 months until she turned 18. The conversations we had were that was a much better place than being on that bridge. As bad as that may sound, given her options, that was the best shot we had. So we linked arms, and I wrapped myself around her, and we walked across that bridge. And when we got to the initial checkpoint, they asked for your passport. We had 2, we didn't have 3. And they asked what we were doing and why we had her there. And at this point, we had actually crossed the river, so we probably shouldn't have done that. And they went and got a supervisor. And Michael is fabulous. He just stood. I'm over in the corner with Jessica, hugging and crying. I wasn't terrified. I was afraid for her. Yeah. And he stood his ground, and that she has a legal right to seek asylum. She's an unaccompanied minor, and here are her documents, and this is who she is. They were a little perplexed by mine and Michael's relationship. I said we were the perfect pair. You've got Grandma over here hugging this lady and crying, and you've got Michael, the public school administrator, standing his ground. Yeah. And eventually the supervisor said, okay, well, whatever. And we hugged one more time, and they took her away. We are not able to track her. We can track most asylum seekers, but because she's underage, we were not able to get her.
I want to turn, and I want to talk to Alba as well about some of this. I know you've been down there recently. But what are the legal rights, both for asylum seekers and then folks who just are seeking a better life? But let's start with asylum seekers. What legal rights do they have, Justin?
Sure. So asylum seekers can either apply for asylum affirmatively if they're already here in the country, let's say on a student visa or a visitor visa, or what's happening at the border, they essentially apply for it defensively as a defense to deportation. And it is 100% enshrined in law for decades now that every person has the right to go to the border and request asylum if they feel they are going to suffer persecution or have suffered persecution. Now, they have one hurdle to get over immediately, which is called the credible fear interview, which is administered by an officer down at the border, and there's plenty of issues with that. And then if that individual passes their credible fear interview, then they either go to a detention center, or they get an ankle bracelet, or they're released on their own recognizance or with a sponsor, whatever the case may be. And then they are allowed to have a court hearing, a merits hearing eventually, and that's where themselves and hopefully an attorney presents all of the evidence for why they are persecuted and why they qualify under the 5 categories. But for folks that aren't claiming asylum, it's a little more difficult. First, if you are, and this has been policy for several years, if you are caught within 2 weeks of entering the United States and within 100 miles of the border, you're pretty much going to be put in what's called expedited removal, which means you get 0 due process, you're automatically deported, and you don't get to go through the immigration court system and at least plead your case, whether it's asylum or humanitarian parole, or there's something called Convention Against Torture, where America has to accept people who have been or will probably be tortured if they return to their home country. So if you don't have any of those claims and you are caught soon after entering, then you're pretty much automatically removed. Now, if you go past that day and time and location, then you also are allowed to argue your case in immigration court if you don't fall under expedited removal.
I want to talk in a little bit about some of the legal hurdles that are facing folks down at the border because of the surge, and there's just not enough folks on the ground to help. But
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So in Brownsville, I can only speak about Brownsville.
Sure.
In Brownsville, we are seeing a huge surge increase in people swimming. They simply get frustrated at that bridge. They
With the
were not
metering,
prepared to.
This is for the Remain in Mexico policy.
Yeah, pretty much.
But even before the Remain in Mexico,
Just the line.
It's just the metering. We have 1,200 people. We get 2 people a day. Maybe we haven't had anyone since Sunday, and today's Friday. So, we're teaching them to break the law. So we're teaching them it's easier and faster to what we call swim. They literally swim the Rio Grande. When they swim, when they present themselves for asylum to the first Border Patrol who's waiting on them, we're back to catch and release. They don't immediately deport them. They take them to the bus station in their wet clothes from the Rio Grande, and they are treated basically the same way the asylum seekers are, except they didn't spend 2 months in detention, and they don't have an ankle monitor, and they don't have, so why are they not that I'm asking that they
For
do,
sure.
but why are they not immediately deported?
It's a discretionary policy, and basically it's up to the officers and the CBP officials at that border location to decide how they want to deal with it. Sometimes going the expedited removal route isn't logistically possible because of the surge, just to turn around all of those people and return them. And a lot of folks, even if you swim the river and you come up to a CBP officer, if you tell that CBP officer, even though you've gone around the port of entry, that you want to seek asylum,
They still have to.
they still have to let you do it. And that's why the Remain in Mexico policy, and then previously the metering, it is somewhat pointless, because you have a right to make that claim if you come across the bridge, if you swim the river, if you come in an airplane, if you're already in the United States. Everyone has a right to make a claim to asylum. Some myth that I want to debunk about that is a lot of times you'll hear, and I hear this on cable news all the time from everyone, oh, why don't they just go and make that claim at the consulate or the embassy for the U.S. in their home country? And the reason is because you can't. There's no law that allows that. Essentially, talking with USCIS and the Department of State is, if someone is like running with, there's pitchforks and an angry mob behind them, they'll let them in to the embassy type of thing, but they cannot claim asylum specifically there. So yeah, that's why a lot of folks are just giving up, because they've spent 2-3 months in these plazas roasting, being taken advantage of by the federales or the cartels, and so it's their last ditch effort to try to get across before they run out of resources.
And Judy, if I may, I just want to speak to the assumption that there is a surge. Actually, when you look at the data, we do have an increase right now, but it's not at its peak. In the mid 2000s, there was much more of a peak than there is now.
So that's really inaccurate reporting when people say there's a surge,
That's
because
correct.
it's not
Right.
an
Yeah,
even
like,
so
inaccurate
relative to like
It's a
last
surge.
year or
It's
the
a
year
surge,
before,
but it's not an increase over
Right.
what
Over,
we
yeah,
Right,
would
and
expect
really
us
what's
10 years ago.
creating much more of the feel of a surge
Is
is
the
this
metering.
metering, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And when I look at the numbers of people, and having worked at the UN High Commission for Refugees, and the absorption numbers that other countries, which were far more impoverished than our country is, it is ludicrous to me what we are doing to people, right? The structure is made such that it is causing suffering, when we could really be absorbing many more people much more quickly in a much more humane way to attend to their right to ask for asylum. So it's really we should not repeat that there is a surge. We should do our data checking. We should be evidence-based, and we should act like humans in this situation.
Since we're on the topic of metering, and I can only speak to what happens in Brownsville. So when you present when you go to a legal point of entry, which is the bridge in Brownsville, and you present yourself for asylum, you're immediately rejected and told to put your name on a list. So there's actually a list. And when I was there in April, there were 462. When I was there in May, there were 1,400. The last report I got a couple of days ago was 1,900. The Mexican government is in control of that list. And the fact that you're number 2 on that list does not mean you're going to cross as the second person. There are many, many ways to get around that system. What we hear is cartel involvement. If you will pay, our number is $300, you go to the top of the list. I don't know who your audience is, but the other way is to be friendly with a guard. And so you have this lovely little quiet, quaint couple or family from Guatemala. They don't have a chance. They don't have $300. So one of the questions we have all of the time is why, if it's our country that is metering, why is the Mexican government in control of the list? Why don't we have a list? You come to the border, you sign up, number 2 is open, you go. We hear things like, we only have a bed for a single man. Okay, we can deal with that. We can deal with a family. We don't have beds for families right now, we're only taking single people. But this randomness of this metering is one of the things that causes so much frustration.
Have you both heard the same situation?
I've witnessed it, literally.
Been there, done that.
Yeah,
Tell us about your experience.
Sure. So one of the trips last October, I went down on a grant from Clinic, the Catholic Legal Immigration Network, to Nogales, Arizona / Mexico, and worked with the Florence Project there, and went across the border and met with asylum seekers who had put their name on the list through this metering program. And what I had heard were very similar things, that it's corrupted by the federales that are running it, and it's corrupted by the cartel members. And I mean, it's also horrifying visually, just because you have, like you said, families waiting in line. They literally have like their number written on their arm. I mean, it just evokes all sorts of historical issues. And essentially they're spread when I went down there, they were spread throughout Nogales. And we went to a soup kitchen and then over to a community center that had been converted to a respite center. And it was mostly families, a lot of single parents with children. And I guess the one story that really got me from that particular trip was when we did go to the community center. It was almost exclusively for single moms with children, and one of the women we spoke with was from El Salvador, and she had fled because her husband was part of the military in El Salvador and was actually an anti-drug, part of the anti-drug faction, and he got kidnapped and essentially killed in front of the entire village. And so she fled with her son, and the individual's father was the soldier. And we're talking to her, and the kid has this toy, this figurine, action figure. It's like missing a leg and missing an arm or whatever. But while we're talking with the mom, I had my senior legal assistant with me. She was talking with the mom. I started playing with the kid, and he was super quiet, and then as soon as there was any human interaction, I mean, he started laughing, and it was just hit you like right in the gut, because we just heard the story of where they'd come from, and that mom had the number, and we asked her, so where are they on the list? And she's like, well, here technically, but unless I do something, we probably aren't getting through anytime soon. So the metering problem has been there, and now the explicit remain in Mexico issue. Policy on top of that.
It's exacerbated it.
Yeah, it's basically exacerbated the suffering and made due process with representation next to impossible.
And I'll speak to it from the other side. It's evident that there is no rhyme or reason, except for, are you willing to dehumanize yourself?
Yep.
And in what way and to what extent will you go, right, to save your life, and maybe you'll lose your life while trying to do that. On the other side, when we were volunteering with Angry Tias and Abuelas of the RGV at the McAllen bus station, as we were talking to people about what their legal document said was their next step, it's impossible to tell. So why does one person have a notice for deportation and the other person is getting to state their case for asylum, and their stories are very similar. And you see this over and over and over again.
And their court date is way far away in a
or
far away city,
to
or
be
it's
determined.
tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's just no way to figure any of this out. And we're confused. Imagine what they're feeling.
Right, right. They don't even speak English, which is part of why there's a need for volunteers to go interpret what is on these papers to people. It's their right to know what they're going through. And they may not even have a full grasp of Spanish because they have other indigenous languages that are their primary language. And so, just, imagine going through a process that you can't decipher on your own, and a process that really isn't a process. It's just really survival of the fittest in a sense.
So there are ICE raids planned in 10 major cities on Sunday, or that's what we've all heard. What's being done through the volunteer networks and legal networks to kind of prepare for that? Because that brings a whole different issue to light.
So we have a group called Good People Doing Good or something like that. And they are sending out, it's a national group, and they are sending out check sheets for asylum seekers and what are your rights, and don't answer the door, and don't answer any questions, and
Don't sign
here's
anything.
here's the phone number that you call if you get in trouble. And so that's kind of about all we can do. There's simply not enough attorneys to represent these people. So we're trying to make the people that we know that they are seeking asylum aware that this is coming and what is the appropriate response.
There aren't enough lawyers. I mean, I've been hearing reports out of El Paso this week on NPR, and it's overwhelming for the attorneys. They're at an emotional, physical, mental breaking point because, number one, their access to these folks has been hindered by Remain in Mexico and other issues, and number two, there's just not enough of them.
And that's why what we're trying to do as far as the raids that will occur in these cities, we're preparing as if Austin is on the list. And we've been working with the Commission on Immigrant Affairs, Karen Crawford, as well as the Mexican Consulate, and then members of Texas Here to Stay Coalition, legal service providers, and grassroots leadership to have a plan. And it's loosely based on something we threw together ad hoc back in 2017 with the Runberg raids that occurred shortly after the whole controversy with are we a sanctuary city or not, and essentially we're trying to implement that if necessary, but now based on what we learned having to throw it together at the last second to make it more streamlined. And the idea is that grassroots leadership is going to help us a lot with the intake in the beginning, and then we are partnering with both private and nonprofit attorneys to be on the ready to go should something happen locally. But on the border, it is nearly, max 30% of folks are getting representation, and that's probably an optimistic number. But it is crucial that individuals have representation, because I believe the last number I saw is that their chances of getting asylum with an attorney versus without an attorney is 5-fold. So a 500% increase in possibility of gaining asylum. So yeah, there's not nearly enough, and hopefully the one silver lining is there has been funding like that I was able to take advantage of and go down there, and hopefully there'll just be more of that, because unless you're going to have tons of attorneys right there at the border and a lot more immigration judges, this problem is going to continue in perpetuity.
Two more quick questions. I know we've been speaking for a while. What myths would each of you like to dispel is the first question. What would you like people to know? You've already said this isn't a surge. Hey, this has been going on for a long time. What are some other things that you really want people to know that are just untruths that are out there?
These people are like you and me. They are not criminals. They are people who are hoping to live long and healthy lives, just like you and me, and who have goals and aspirations for their families, and who are bearing the brunt of geopolitical conflicts. And they are not here to steal jobs or impose or to commit crimes. They're here to be contributors to our society. And many times, again, let us not forget that the benefits of our privilege are on their backs, literally on their backs, in terms of the things that we get to enjoy here have been because of the sacrifices that people have made for many decades there. So that's what I would like people to really keep in mind.
Anne.
You stole my thunder. We have a saying that these people are not dangerous, they are in danger. And they are simply seeking a better life. The other myth I would like to dispel is that these are not Mexican citizens. The Mexican people are very smart. When they realized that this system was so broken, they quit. We see very few people from Mexico seeking asylum. These are people from all over the world. The Golden Triangle, which is El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala, yes, but Cuba, I always say there can't be a Cuban guy left in Cuba. It is overwhelming, the number of Cubans we see. Africa, Cameroon, I had a guy from Bangladesh. So that myth that it's all the Mexicans coming up to steal the jobs and invade our country, which was really their country, but we won't talk about that, is simply not true. That is not who we see at the border. The other myth is that single men are stealing children so that they've heard that if they have a child with them, they can come across. Nobody's walking 1,500 miles with a 4-year-old if that 4-year-old is not theirs. I have met thousands of quote-unquote families, both at the Humanitarian Respite Center and at the bridge. These are families. These are not stolen children that are being used in sex trafficking or to get someone across the border.
That's
that is
more
simply
likely
not
happening
true.
Here, when they get here,
Right.
and we lose them in our system,
Right.
and we have no way to trace them in our system. That's where the trafficking is actually happening, and the danger we put them in having them wait in some of the most dangerous cities in the world on the U.S.-Mexico border.
Justin.
I mean, essentially, just a couple of facts to back up what y'all have said. I mean, every study, and this is not from, far left-wing think tanks, has shown time and time again, immigrants commit crimes at a far lower rate than native-born U.S. citizens. And in fact, it takes them 3 generations to catch up with the native population. And also this this myth of, it's taking away from the country, not putting anything back. The IRS has said that close to $8 billion a year is paid into Social Security by undocumented immigrants that will never, ever have access to that money. So just some facts to back up those myths that are 100% true. And then the idea that that these folks, because I hear this time and time again from some of the conservative circles that I'm in, is that, well, why don't they just stay in their home country and make it better? And it's to try and understand the systemic poverty and lack of democracy in those countries for all the reasons that have been named. And then the one that I always like to throw out there is that there's no money for this violence, for these cartels, if there's not the insatiable drug habit the United States has. That is where that money goes. That is what the destruction that it causes. That is 100% a fact. So that's the myth that I wanted to add on to, is that this is, even if you weren't in the 80s during the alive fighting, when we were fighting communists in pretty dirty ways, or several other issues that have been caused there, this money train just never stops. And until that stops, or at least is reduced some, I think we're going to continue to see this problem.
The final question I have for you, and this segues into it, is what do you see as the solution? I mean, what do all of you, if you could wave a magic wand and say, okay, we're gonna solve this issue, what would that look like? Because I know this has been a huge political hot potato, and there are very strong feelings on both sides of the aisle. So as an individual who has been involved in this work, what would each of you like, and I'll start with you, Justin, like to see happen?
Sure. I mean, it's the battle cry of immigration attorneys for about 30 years now, but comprehensive immigration reform. And the idea that, like President George W. Bush said, our humanitarianism doesn't end at the border. We need, whenever we make these laws, to take the humane treatment of folks, whether they're seeking asylum or not, into effect. And then we also need to stop creating these artificial crises by having 25-year waits for family-based immigration, or restricting work permits for those persons who there are jobs here for. And they come here and they work anyway without a work permit, and they are just taken advantage of a lot of times, either by the system itself, just by paying into it, or by the employers. Exactly. So comprehensive immigration reform, and as part of that, specifically dealing with asylum, we need way more immigration judges, and there needs to be, for at least children, for everyone preferably, for at least children, there needs to be free pro bono legal representation when children are going through asylum hearings. It's one of the sickest things I've ever witnessed, is looking at a 5-year-old representing himself in immigration court. And he was an indigenous, so he didn't even, the Spanish wasn't even good enough to really understand what was going on. So if I had a magic wand, that's what I would do if I could make it happen in a snap.
In the very short term, the elimination of the metering. Maybe even before that, if the U.S. government could get in control, if we're going to have a list and it's our country that they're coming into, then why are we not in control of the list to at least equalize that playing field? So get control of the list, eliminate the metering, allow the immigration process to happen as it has for many, many years, and infuse some humanity into the way we treat these people.
I'll just say that, right now, the estimates of the numbers coming out of what we're spending per person on doing all of this to them is something like $700 to $800
a day.
A day.
A day, yeah. I could rent a suite at the W for $700 to $800 a day.
And give them a toothbrush and some
Yes,
soap.
that's
Yeah.
right. And so we really need to attend to this as the humanitarian crisis that it is, in terms of the danger that people are seeking, the protection that they are seeking. Case study out of South America and Chile. They accepted refugees all over their country. I believe this was in the 80s and 90s. And they responded as neighbors and as humans. Each family in these rural places adopted a family. And they actually set up a welcome system, right? They knew that these people were coming. They knew that they were in danger. They knew that they needed help. And they responded as one community to another community in the most humanitarian of ways. At $700 to $800 a pop, we can do that here.
Just to add on to that, another thing that we need to get rid of is, and this is throughout the entire prison system, but the for-profit companies running these, because where is that $700 to $800 a day going whenever these per person per day, when there's these type of conditions that we're witnessing? It's a racket, and that's why.
Justin Estep with Catholic Services, Ann Finch, Team Brownsville, Alba, Sereno. And tell me the name of the group, because I know it's like Angry Grandmothers.
Angry Tias y Abuelas of the
Abuelas.
Riverina Valley is who we volunteered with and hope to continue to volunteer with in subsequent visits to the border.
I'm also a member of Angry Tias and Abuelas. So, yay me.
Great organization.
So there's so many organizations that are doing good work on the humanitarian front down the valley. We're going to be listing a few of those on our Facebook page, because people there are people that feel frustrated and they want to get involved. So hopefully you all have shine the light on some of the ways people can give back. And I'm sure Catholic Charities, Team Brownsville, and the Angry Tias and Abuelas, and they all need folks on the ground helping. So, and thank you all for sharing some of your afternoon with us. We will continue to bring you issues that we think are important and we need to amplify in our community here on Decibel. Make it a good weekend.